book is totally true, except for the parts that aren't. The reason this memoir is only mostly true instead of totally true is that I relish not getting sued. Also, I want my mother to be able to say, "Oh, that never happened. Of course we never actually tossed her out of a moving car when she was 8. That's one of those crazy things that isn't quite the truth." And she's right, because the truth is that I was 9. I was sitting on my mom's lap when my dad made a hard left, the door popped open, and I was tossed out like a sack full of kittens. My mom managed to grab my arm, which would have been helpful if my father had actually stopped the car. But apparently he didn't notice, or just possibly thought I'd catch up, and so my legs were dragged through a parking lot that I'm pretty sure was paved with broken glass. "Don't make me come back there" is an empty threat. Unless your father has been driving 4 hours with 2 screaming kids and he suddenly gets very quiet. In which case you should lock your door. I'm not saying he intentionally threw me out of a moving car, just that an opportunity presented itself and my father is a dangerous man who shouldn't be trusted. This story takes place in the town of Wall, Texas. Yes, it exists. No, I'm not making this up. Jenny Lawson takes the readers through the highs and lows of her life in a town so small they didn't even have a gas station. Her sadistic humor and positively negative outlook will make you fall in love with her story in the weirdest way possible. So come with me to Wall, Texas, and learn an important lesson about thankfulness in times of poverty through the eyes of a true Southerner in Let's Pretend This Never Happened by Jenny Lawson. Wall is basically a tiny town with dirt. There's a lot of dirt and cotton and gin in Wall. When people refer to gin, they're talking about the cotton gin, which is the only real business in town and is like a factory that turns cotton into different cotton, maybe? I honestly have no idea. I never actually bothered to learn because I always figured I would be escaping this tiny country town, and that's pretty much how my entire life went. I've managed to pinpoint several differences between my childhood and that of pretty much everyone else in the entire world. I call these points things most people have never experienced or could have even possibly imagined, but that totally happened to me. Number 1. Most people don't have poisonous tap water in their house. Most people don't get letters from the government telling them not to drink their poisonous tap water because dangerous radon is leaked into their well. In fact, most people don't get their poisonous tap water from a well at all. Concerned relatives would question my mother about the risks of me being exposed to all that radon, but she waved them off saying, "Oh, she couldn't swallow it even if she wanted to. She'd throw it up immediately. It's that toxic. So, no worries." My mom was a big proponent of the "what doesn't kill you makes you stronger" theory, almost to the point where she seemed to be daring the world to kill me. Number 2, most people have running water. I mean, we mostly had running water, except for when we didn't, which was often. As my sister and I would say to each other, you never really appreciate your poisonous well water until it's gone. In the summer, the water would occasionally stop for no reason whatsoever. In the winter, the pipes would freeze and we'd be forced to fill up pots of water from our cistern. It's even less glamorous than it sounds. I once pointed out to my mother that the water from the cistern seemed slightly brown, and that it didn't really seem like the cleanest way to wash your hair, but she sighed at me in disappointment, saying, "It's pronounced beige," as if the pronunciation somehow made it fancier. Okay, the cistern water seemed slightly more beige than the water from the tap. Number 3 on the list of things most people have never experienced or could even possibly imagine, but that totally happened to me. In case you've forgotten, most people don't have live raccoons in their house. My dad was always rescuing animals. And by rescuing animals, I mean killing the mother and then discovering she had babies and bringing them home to raise them in the bathtub. When the orphan raccoons were little, my mom sewed tiny gems for them because this was the 80s. And they were adorable. But then the raccoons grew big enough to climb out of the bathtub and pretty much destroyed the entire house. When the orphan raccoons were old enough, we sent them all off to the woods, except for one raccoon that we kept as a pet. His name was Rambo. Rambo learned how to turn on the bathroom sink and would wash random things in it all the time, like it was his own private river. Rambo was totally OCD, and he was driven to wash everything that he saw. Once, we came home to find Rambo in the sink, washing a tiny sliver of soap that had been a new bar that morning. He looked exhausted, but when we tried to take away the last bit of soap, he growled at us. So we let him finish. Sometimes, when I'm working on an impossible project, I think how Rambo was feeling. With his soap sliver and puckered little fingers covered in radon water, and it makes me sad. But then I laugh because it reminds me that right after the soap incident, my mom insisted Rambo needed to live outside in a chicken cage to protect him from himself. I had placed him on top of the cage and my little sister Lisa whacked him on the nose, and then Rambo flipped out and jumped directly on my sister's face. He grabbed on her ears and he was hissing and looking into her eyes like, "I will bring you down!" It was totally awesome. Number 4. Most people don't go out into the woods to catch armadillos so that their father can race them professionally. There is nothing like seeing your father down on his hands and knees with 5 other grown men, screaming and slapping at the ground in order to scare the respective armadillos into crossing the finish line first. And when I say there's nothing like it, what I mean is these people are insane. Usually, when I tell people my father was a Texas armadillo racing champion, they assume I'm exaggerating. But then I pull out his silver armadillo championship ring, and then they usually leave quickly. The gold armadillo championship ring would be more impressive to show off. But we don't have it anymore because my father traded it for a Victorian funeral carriage. Number 5. Most people don't herniate a disc simply from brushing their hair too hard. I was brushing my hair and I heard a pop in my neck. I could barely even breathe, it hurt so much. Then I drove myself to work and almost passed out from a combination of the pain and the not breathing. When I got there, I hurt so much I couldn't even move my mouth to talk. So I wrote, "I have broken my neck," on a post-it, and my bewildered office mate drove me to the hospital. Turns out I'd herniated a disc. The doctor gave me a pamphlet on domestic abuse and kept asking me whether someone was hurting me at home, because apparently most people don't herniate a disc simply from brushing their hair too hard. I prefer to think most people just don't brush their hair as enthusiastically as I do. Right here is when people begin to say, "I don't believe any of this." And I have to show them pictures or get my mom on the phone to confirm it. And then they get very quiet. Probably out of respect. Or possibly pity. When you're surrounded by people who are just as poor as you, life doesn't seem all that weird. For instance, one of my friends grew up in a house with a dirt floor. And it's hard to feel too bad about your tiny house when you have the privilege of owning carpet. In my parents' defense, I never realized we were poor, because my parents never said that we couldn't afford things, just that we didn't need them. Things like ballet lessons and ponies and tap water that won't kill you.